ध्वनिर्वर्णा पदं वाक्यमित्यास्पद चतुष्टयम् यस्याः सूक्ष्मादि भेदे वाग्देवीं तामुपास्महे।
The Electronic Media Production and Research Center of Madhya Pradesh, Bhoj Open University presents an audio program on visual impairment. This audio program will be useful to the students of B.Ed Special Education Program. The title of audio program is Teaching Compensatory Skills to Students with Visual Impairment. To deliver the lecture on this topic, we have invited our subject expert, Dr. Nora Griffing Shirley. She is a professor in the program of special education at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas in the United States of America. This audio program is recorded, edited and presented by Amar Bahadur Yadav. Let's listen to the first part of audio program, Teaching Compensatory Skills to Students with Visual Impairment.
Hello, dear listeners. I am a professor in the Special Education Program in the Department of Educational Psychology and Leadership of the College of Education at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas, in the United States of America. In addition, I also coordinate the Orientation and Mobility Specialist Program, and I am the director of the Virginia Murray Sal Center for Research and Education in Visual Impairment. I have been teaching in a university system for over 20 years. I would like to thank MPBOU Open University for this opportunity to speak to you today about teaching compensatory skills to students with visual impairments. This topic will be presented in two 30-minute lectures. The majority of the content for these lectures comes from Prescriptions for Independence, Working with Older People Who Are Visually Impaired, authored by myself and Ms. Gerta Groff. It was published by the American Foundation for the Blind and was written for professionals who work with older people who are visually impaired, but its content is still germane for teachers of students with visual impairments and other professionals who teach these students as well, irrespective of the student's age. The objective for today's lecture is to teach you the techniques and adaptations used by individuals with visual impairments to accomplish some basic daily living skills, so you, in turn, can teach these skills to your students. Some of the questions we will answer today are: how does a student with visual impairments know where she is in her environment? How does a student with visual impairment travel by herself inside a building while protecting herself? How does a student with visual impairment learn how to get around a room and a building like a classroom and school? First, we will learn about orientation and mobility techniques. Most of the visually impaired people you work with will probably get around capably without using special techniques. In fact, you may not be able to tell from the way they walk or move that they have any vision loss. But some individuals benefit from skills that allow them to move about more safely. These skills are called orientation and mobility techniques. Orientation means using the senses to figure out where one is. For example, a visually impaired person can rely on food orders to tell if a bakery or restaurant or the dining room is nearby. Or the person can use a change in floor covering from tile to carpet to identify the transition from a hallway to a bedroom. Mobility means the ability to move from place to place, from home to workplace or shopping area, for example, or simply to be able to walk through one's environment. Advanced orientation and mobility techniques are complicated. They may involve the use of a specialized cane and must be taught by orientation and mobility specialists. You should not get involved in teaching such skills, but there are simple techniques you can learn and then teach to people who are blind who desire your help. All it takes is a willingness to explore something that is new and interesting. Let's talk a little bit about learning to be a human guide. Learning how to act as a human guide, a gentle extra hand which facilitates the safe movement of persons with visual impairments, is probably the most basic way to help visually impaired persons when needed. Human guide technique can be used in all kinds of situations, but let us begin with guiding someone through an open space, such as an uncrowded room or school corridor. First, remember to ask if your assistance is needed. Most visually impaired people do not need any help, and they may resent having it forced on them. A simple, "Can I give you a hand?" or "Do you want any help?" is a good way to find out whether you are wanted. Then, if your help is needed, follow these 4 basic steps. Step 1. Touch the person's hand with the back of your hand. Then advise him or her to take hold of your arm just above the elbow, or for more stable support, at the inner elbow. If still more support is required, bend your arm at a 90-degree angle to your body and have the person grasp your forearm. Always ask the individual you are helping which technique he or she prefers and try to oblige if possible. Step 2. Hold your arm in a relaxed manner, yet close to your body, and tell the person you are helping to do the same. This stance allows for easy interpretation of your movement by the person. Step 3. Have the person walk about a half step behind you and slightly to the side. His or her shoulder should be directly behind yours. If you are using the more supportive forearm grasp, the person should be at your side rather than behind you. Step 4. Walk at a comfortable pace, neither dragging nor pushing the individual you are helping. As you walk, keep up a normal conversation, interspersing verbal reminders when necessary. For example, you may say, "We're coming to the end of the corridor." You can also communicate in a non-verbal way, such as by slowing down when approaching the end of a corridor or another obstacle. How to negotiate tight spaces. Spaces are not always open, uncrowded, or easy to navigate. Therefore, you need to know guiding techniques for situations like these. In particular, narrow spaces. To walk between pieces of furniture or through a group of people, move your arm toward the center of your back. This position places the person directly behind you and forces him or her to take smaller steps. Tell the person to extend the arm that is holding yours, the grasping arm, to full length so your heels do not get stepped on. If the person is too frail to extend an arm, have him or her stand behind you and put one hand on your waist. If necessary, changing the arm used to grasp your arm. Before you reach an open space, turn so you and the person can sidestep through it together. At doorways, maneuver so your partner is standing to your side and closest to the door hinges. Have the person hold the door open while you go through first, then guide him or her through. If the person is not strong enough to hold the door open, hold it open yourself and guide both of you through at the same time, or have the person go through ahead of you. At stairways, tell your partner whether the stairs go up or down and how many flights there are. Then position the person so he or she can grasp the handrail, if there is one. Walk up or down the stairs in front of the person and one step ahead. Pause briefly or announce the approach of a landing or the last step. Keep in mind, for younger people, you may not have to have them on the handrail side. Helping someone get seated. Guide the person to the front of the chair or other seat and describe its position. For example, you're standing in front of the chair now. For stability, place the person's hand on the chair back or arm. Have him or her feel the seat with the other hand. Turn around and sit down. Getting someone with a visual impairment into a car to go somewhere. If the person will be opening the car door, point out where the door handle is. Have the person touch the roof of the car with his or her free hand to protect the head while getting in. Depending on the person's vision loss, it may be necessary for you to help support the person by holding his or her arm as he or she steps into the car and sits down. If the person uses a long cane or a folding cane, it should be placed near the door so it does not interfere with the driver. Make certain the person closes the door securely. Many people who are visually impaired may use adaptive equipment, such as support canes, walkers, and wheelchairs. Here are a few tips to keep in mind when the people you are helping use such items. When using a support cane, walk on the side away from the cane. If the person needs stronger support, have him or her hold onto your forearm with the hand that is not holding the cane. Adjust your pace to the person's slower pace when he or she is using a cane. Warn of approaching stairs and curbs and allow time for the person to react. If the person with a visual impairment is using a walker, ask the person how he or she would like to be guided. Some people only want to have the environment described to them. Others will ask you to put your hand on one of their hands and walk along with the walker. In either case, keep your pace slow and your steps short. Try to avoid changes in elevation. An individual with a visual impairment may want to go through doorways ahead of you while you hold the door open. Be sure that he or she pauses with the walker and uses an upper hand and forearm protective technique to protect his or her face and head from the door. For people who are blind or visually impaired who are using a wheelchair, if you are asked to push this person in a wheelchair, do so when possible. People who push themselves may want you to guide them by putting your hand on one of their shoulders. Whether you push a wheelchair or walk alongside it, provide information about such structures as stairs and curbs. For people who would like to move around by themselves, there are specific techniques that can be used. A human guide may not always be available or necessary. All that some people need is to use a safety bolstering technique that can keep them from bumping into objects or furniture. If you have observed that someone frequently has such mishaps, suggest that he or she learn 2 simple means of self-protection. If the person is amenable, you can demonstrate how the methods work. Both rely on holding one forearm away from the body as a gentle buffer against obstacles. Method 1 is the upper hand and forearm protective technique, which protects the head and the face and chest level. Tell the person to extend the stronger arm straight out ahead, bend and bring it to the opposite shoulder, and hold it about 8 to 10 inches away from the body with the palm turned outward. Next, have the person lift the arm so it is in front of his face, if possible, as high as the forehead, with the fingers of the hand curled. Advise the individual to keep the fingers and the entire body relaxed while walking forward. Method 2, lower hand and forearm protective technique. As you can see from this name of this technique, it protects the lower portion of the body. Tell the person who is blind or with a visual impairment to position the stronger arm comfortably at the belly button. Then extend it out about 8 to 10 inches with the palm facing the body. For maximum safety, the other hand can be positioned in the upper hand and forearm technique. While walking, body and fingers should be kept relaxed. It is a good idea to practice the 2 methods yourself before teaching them to students, and then to practice with the individual as well. Bear in mind that it can take some time to remember to move about with one arm extended. The selection of a method, by the way, should depend in part on the height of the hazards one is likely to encounter. Another consideration is the degree of the person's infirmity. You may need to modify these techniques. For example, in the lower hand and forearm protective technique, the person can position his or her arm off-center rather than at the belly button. When you modify a technique, though, be certain not to sacrifice safety. In conjunction with protective techniques, you may want to teach a skill to a student called trailing. Trailing is a way of moving the fingers along a wall to keep a line straight while walking, to find a door, or to walk through a building. Usually, trailing is done along the right wall of a hallway or room, but can be done along the left if necessary. To teach this technique, have the individual do the following. Stand parallel to the wall and close to it. Touch the wall with the hand nearest to it. Cup the fingers slightly for protection and move the backs of the fingers, particularly the knuckles of the index and middle fingers gently along the wall while walking. When the person comes to a doorway, he or she should trail across the opening, taking care not to get off balance or to veer into the room. The upper hand and forearm technique should also be used here to avoid bumping the face against the door frame. As with the protective methods, trailing takes some practice. So remember to allow plenty of time when you are teaching this technique. Also, remember to stay with the person the first few times she or he tries it. Once protective techniques have been mastered, they can be used to explore new environments. But these skills may not always be sufficient. Sometimes the assistance of an individual with vision will be needed. To be helpful, first imagine yourself walking into a room that you have never seen before. You would be able to take in the key aspects, the size of the room, the function of the room, and its decor, with just a single glance. You need to realize that some visually impaired people cannot see well enough to learn about the room in this way. To master the terrain, they need to have the room presented to them in a step-by-step manner. In short, they need to learn the room familiarization technique. You can tell by the way a person moves if this technique is needed. For example, Mrs. Banda, a teacher of students with visual impairments, noticed that George, a visually impaired boy with low vision, was a new student and had difficulty finding his way around. She would have to help him become familiar with the various classrooms and areas in his new school. Mrs. Banda started with George's classroom. First, she stood with George in the doorway for a moment or two and asked him if there were any objects next to the door that would help him to identify this classroom in the future. Mrs. Banda urged George to commit the position of the light switch plate to memory. Mrs. Banda advised George to trail one wall of the classroom at a time, starting with the right wall, then return back to the entryway. She suggested that he label each wall in the room to differentiate it from others. As he trailed, George decided to call the left wall the window wall, the right wall the no window wall, the wall opposite the small door wall, and the wall near the entrance the big door wall. Remembering these labels would enable George to orient himself in the future and to ask for help in reaching a destination within the room. The labeling technique can be applied to any room a person uses. For example, George may want to categorize his bedroom walls as the bed wall, the window wall, the closet wall, and the door wall. After labeling the walls, George explored the center of the room, which contained many pieces of furniture, using a crisscross pattern of movement. First, he trailed along the right wall to the corner, then faced the center of the room, and protecting himself with the upper and lower forearm and hand techniques, crossed to the opposite corner. As George walked along, George called out the pieces of furniture he passed, such as desks and chairs. He repeated this process from the other corners of the classroom and then returned to the doorway. Now, George can remember the position of the desks and chairs and other furniture in the room's center relative to the peripheral walls. He had completed the room familiarization process. Mrs. Banda repeated this process with George in other schoolrooms. Within a short time, he was able to find his way around his school without difficulty. Another way to aid in the familiarization process is to use low-vision maps of the rooms a student is trying to master, or to record the orientation sessions themselves. Although teaching them can take some time, familiarization, trailing, and protective techniques save time in the long run because they make students more independent and safe. These skills allow people with visual impairments to participate fully. Everyone benefits when you teach the basic orientation and mobility skills to those who need to rely on them to get around. In conclusion, the important points to remember from today's lecture are: teaching basic orientation and mobility skills will help a visually impaired student to be independent in his or her environment. Teachers of students with visual impairments can and should teach these skills to their students. Human guides can be used to assist a student to travel safely in many environments. Upper and lower protective techniques can enable a student with visual impairment to travel safely in an open space like in a school corridor or cafeteria. Room familiarization is a technique students can use to acquaint themselves with a new place like a classroom or school building. This technique can be generalized to any new area, such as a student's new home, temple, or workplace. I hope you have gained some new information today that you can use in your workplace with the students you teach or with individuals you may come into contact with. Thank you for listening.
You were listening to the first part of an audio program teaching compensatory skills to students with visual impairment. The subject expert and speaker was Dr. Nora Griffing Shirley. Announcer was Rajni Sen. This audio program was recorded, edited and presented by Amar Bahadur Yadav. This audio program was a production of the Electronic Media Production and Research Center of Madhya Pradesh Bhoj Open University.